Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we dive into Edgar Allan Poe's haunting tale, The Man of the Crowd, but not as you've read it before. This version has been reimagined and rewritten, crafted to bring you a fresh, suspenseful experience that avoids repetition and breathes new life into Poe's dark vision. Some books, they say, refuse to be read, guarding their secrets like locked vaults. And so it is with certain lives. Men perish in silence, clutching invisible confessors, their throats twisted in despair, their hearts crushed by horrors too monstrous to name. The darkest crimes, it seems, are buried with their keepers. It was on an autumn evening, not long ago, that I found myself at the wide bow window of the D Coffee House in London. I had been ill for months, but now, with strength returning, I felt a strange exhilaration, an almost electric clarity of mind. Even the act of breathing was a pleasure. A cigar smoldered between my fingers, a newspaper lay forgotten in my lap, and I drifted between idle distractions, scanning advertisements, watching the mixed company inside, and gazing through the smoky glass into the restless street. Outside, the city pulsed. The thoroughfare had been crowded all day, but as night fell, the tide swelled. Lamps flared to life, and two ceaseless rivers of humanity surged past the door. I had never witnessed such a scene at this hour, and the sight struck me with a thrilling sense of novelty. Slowly, I surrendered all thought of the room behind me and gave myself wholly to the spectacle beyond the window, the living ocean of faces, each carrying its own untold story. At first, I saw the crowd as a single mass, an endless tide of humanity flowing past me, but soon my gaze sharpened, and I began to notice the details, the cut of a coat, the tilt of a chin, the restless flicker in a stranger's eyes. Each figure carried its own rhythm, its own silent story. Most of them moved with a businesslike air, their brows furrowed, eyes darting, intent only on pushing forward. When jostled, they showed no anger, merely straightened their clothes and pressed on. Yet others were different, restless, flushed, muttering to themselves as though the sheer density of the crowd had trapped them in a strange solitude. When blocked, they froze mid-sentence, their hands gesturing wildly, their lips stretched into awkward smiles that masked confusion. If bumped, they bowed with exaggerated politeness, as if crushed beneath the weight of their own embarrassment. These two great classes, the composed and the restless, were dressed in what society calls decent. Merchants, lawyers, tradesmen, men of leisure and men of business alike. They were the respectable backbone of the city, but they did not hold my attention for long. The clerks, however, stood out immediately. I saw two kinds. The younger ones from flashy offices strutted with tight coats, gleaming boots, and hair slicked to perfection. Their lips curled with arrogance, their posture rehearsed, imitations of fashionable gentlemen from a season already past. They wore the discarded graces of the gentry, and in that imitation lay the truest definition of their class.
The upper clerks of the old respectable firms were easy to spot. Their coats and trousers, black or brown, fit for comfort rather than style. White cravats, sturdy shoes, thick gaiters. Their heads were thinning, their ears bent outward from years of holding pens. They adjusted their hats with both hands, and their watches hung from short, heavy chains, symbols of a respectability so practiced it almost seemed genuine. But not all faces in the crowd carried such dignity. Some men, dressed with a reckless flair, revealed themselves as the city's swell pickpockets. I studied them closely, wondering how anyone could mistake them for gentlemen. Their wide cuffs, their exaggerated friendliness, it was all a mask, and a poor one at that. The gamblers were easier still to recognize. Their costumes ranged from gaudy bullies in velvet waistcoats and gilt chains to sober clergymen whose plainness was designed to deflect suspicion. Yet their bodies betrayed them. Sallow skin, dim eyes, lips pressed tight with secret tension. Their voices dropped low, guarded, and their thumbs stretched unnaturally wide, a telltale sign of their trade. And then there were others, men who lived by their wits. Parasites of the crowd, they divided themselves into two battalions: the dandies with their flowing locks and practiced smiles, and the military pretenders with frogged coats and permanent frowns. Different costumes, same hunger. All of them feeding on the city's endless tide of souls. As I looked deeper into the crowd, the faces grew darker, the stories more desperate. I saw hawk-eyed peddlers, their gaze sharp and predatory, though their mouths wore masks of humility. Hardened beggars scowled at the newly fallen, those driven into the streets by sheer despair. Pale invalids shuffled through the mob, death already claiming them, their eyes pleading for a final scrap of hope. Young girls, weary from long hours of labor, hurried homeward, shrinking from the leers of men they could not avoid. Women of the night appeared in every form: the striking beauty whose marble surface concealed rot within, the ragged outcast, diseased and forgotten, the painted crone, clinging desperately to youth, even the child, already trained in the dreadful arts of her trade, burning with ambition to match her elders in vice. Drunkards staggered everywhere, some in rags, bruised and broken, others in filthy but intact clothing, swaggering with thick lips and flushed faces, and still others dressed respectably, their garments brushed clean, yet their eyes wild, their hands twitching as they clutched at anything within reach. Around them swirled piemen, porters, coal heavers, sweeps, organ grinders, monkey handlers, ballad singers, ragged artisans, and exhausted laborers. Their noisy, feverish energy filled the street with a discordant roar, a chaos that battered the ear and stung the eye.
As night thickened, so too did the crowd's character. The orderly faces faded away, replaced by harsher ones, creatures of vice crawling out from their dens. The gas lamps, once weak against the dying day, now ruled the streets, casting a garish glow that turned everything into a shifting theater of shadows, dark yet dazzling. The strange play of light held me captive. Each passing face, glimpsed for only a heartbeat, seemed to reveal years of hidden history. My eyes pressed to the glass, I searched the mob, until suddenly one face froze me in place. An old man, bent and decrepit, perhaps 70. His expression was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was grotesque, magnetic, impossible to ignore. In that instant I thought, even Wretch, master of demonic sketches, would have abandoned his fiends for this visage. In the brief survey I managed, a storm of impressions struck me. Power, cunning, greed, malice, bloodlust, triumph, terror, despair. All of it tangled together in a single look. I was shaken, fascinated, compelled. What wild history lies within that breast, I whispered to myself, and then came the craving, the need to know more, to keep him in sight. I seized my coat, my hat, my cane, and pushed into the street. The man had already vanished into the crowd, but with effort I found him again. I followed, close yet cautious, determined not to be seen. At last I had a clear view of him. He was short, frail, almost skeletal. His clothes hung in filthy rags, yet when the lamplight struck him, I glimpsed something unsettling. Fine linen beneath the dirt, and, through a tear in his worn cloak, a flash of diamond and a dagger. The contradiction was chilling. Who was this man, wrapped in poverty, yet carrying the marks of wealth and violence? My curiosity hardened into resolve. I would follow him wherever he went. Night had fully fallen. A heavy fog smothered the city, soon breaking into relentless rain. Umbrellas sprouted like black wings, the crowd surging with new chaos, jostling, muttering, pressing tighter than before. I cared little for the storm. The damp air, dangerous to my health, felt almost intoxicating. I tied a handkerchief across my mouth and pressed on. For half an hour, the old man struggled along the main thoroughfare. I stayed close, at his elbow, careful not to lose him. He never once looked back. Then he turned into a narrower street, still crowded but less frantic. Here his manner changed. He slowed, hesitated, crossing and recrossing the road without purpose. Each shift forced me to shadow him more closely, the press of bodies hiding my pursuit. The streets stretched long and narrow, and for nearly an hour he wandered its length. Gradually the crowd thinned until it resembled the midday bustle of Broadway, busy but not overwhelming. A second turn brought us into a square blazing with light, alive with people. The old man's former intensity returned. His chin dropped to his chest, his eyes darted wildly beneath knitted brows, scanning every face around him. He pushed forward with grim determination. Yet when he completed the circuit of the square, he turned back and retraced his steps. And then, astonishingly, he repeated the same path again and again. Once, with a sudden movement, he nearly caught me watching. Another hour slipped by, the streets thinning as the rain fell harder and the city cooled. Families retreated to their homes, but the old wanderer pressed on. With sudden impatience, he darted into a nearly deserted side street. To my astonishment, he moved with a vigor I would never have expected from one so frail, rushing down the narrow lane with such speed that I struggled to keep pace. A few minutes later, we reached a sprawling bazaar, alive with noise and light. Here his strange manner returned. He pushed through the crowd without aim, weaving among merchants and buyers as though searching for nothing at all. For nearly 90 minutes I shadowed him, silent as a ghost, thanks to the rubber soles of my shoes. He never once suspected my presence. He entered shop after shop, spoke no word, bought nothing, and stared at every object with a vacant, feverish gaze. My amazement deepened. I swore I would not leave him until I uncovered some fragment of his mystery. At last the clock struck 11. The bazaar emptied, shutters clattering closed. A shopkeeper brushed against the old man, and I saw him shudder violently, as if struck by an unseen hand. He bolted into the night, racing through crooked, empty lanes with astonishing swiftness, until we burst once more onto the great thoroughfare of the D Hotel. But it was changed now. Still lit by gas, but nearly deserted, the rain lashing down in sheets. The old man's face grew pale. He walked a few paces, heavy with gloom, then sighed and turned toward the river. Through twisting alleys he led me, until we reached one of the city's great theaters, just as the audience spilled into the street. The old man gasped for breath, then hurled himself into the throng. And there, in the press of bodies, the torment on his face seemed to ease. His head sank once more to his chest, his eyes roamed wildly beneath his brow, and he moved as I had first seen him, lost, restless, unknowable. He followed the crowd's current, yet his purpose remained a riddle I could not solve.
As the night wore on, the crowd thinned, and the old man's restless unease returned. For a time he shadowed a band of drunken revelers, but one by one they peeled away until only 3 remained, stumbling through a narrow, desolate lane. The stranger halted, lost in thought, then suddenly pressed forward with agitation, driving us toward the city's edge, into a quarter unlike any we had yet seen. It was London at its most foul. Rotting wooden houses leaned precariously, their worm-eaten beams threatening collapse. Grass sprouted between broken paving stones, gutters clogged with filth stank in the damp air. The whole atmosphere reeked of poverty and crime. Yet as we advanced, life stirred again. Bands of the most abandoned souls reeled through the streets, their laughter and curses echoing in the gloom. The old man's spirit flared once more, like a dying lamp sputtering back to life. His step grew springy, urgent. Then, with a sudden turn, a blaze of light struck us. Before us loomed one of the city's temples of excess, a suburban gin palace, gaudy and infernal. Though dawn was near, its doors still poured forth wretches, drunk and broken. At the sight, the old man gave a shriek of joy and forced his way inside. He resumed his strange, restless bearing, pacing back and forth among the throng with no purpose but compulsion. Soon a rush to the doors signaled closing time. The crowd spilled out, and I saw something on his face beyond despair, an agony so deep it seemed to hollow him out. Yet he did not falter. With mad energy, he turned back, retracing his steps, plunging once more into the vast, labyrinthian heart of London.
He fled swiftly, and I followed, my amazement growing into an obsession I could no longer resist. The sun rose as we pressed on, and once again we reached the bustling street of the hotel. Morning brought a tide of humanity nearly as dense as the night before, and there, amid the chaos, the old man resumed his endless wandering. Hour after hour I shadowed him, through the confusion, through the noise, through the ceaseless press of bodies, yet he never strayed from that single street. By the time the second evening fell, I was nearly broken with fatigue. At last, I stopped directly before him, fixing my gaze upon his face. He did not notice me. He simply continued his solemn pacing, as though I were invisible. And in that moment, I understood. This old man was no ordinary wanderer. He was the embodiment of crime itself, its spirit, its genius. He could not bear solitude. He was the man of the crowd. To follow him further would be useless. His deeds, his secrets, his history, none of these could be revealed. The darkest heart of the world is a book more obscure than the Hortulus Animae, and perhaps it is God's mercy that such a book cannot be read.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.